these intendants are going to be there as sort of representatives of the king.
Okay.
Okay? And so what we see beginning here, and this is developed further under Louis XIV, is basically a government bureaucracy. And basically, by bureaucracy, what we mean is all these people working in the government, bureaucracy, all these people working in the government to ensure that the government's rulings are followed. Okay, bureaucracy. What else does Richelieu do? Well, Richelieu also gets rid of the separate militias for Huguenot towns. Okay, so remember the Edict of Nantes had given the Huguenots the ability to have their private militias to defend their towns. Cardinal Richelieu takes away that right. And in foreign policy, Cardinal Richelieu, the Catholic cardinal, who's sort of managing the state, he's a regent for the French king who's young and not as active in actually managing the state. Cardinal Richelieu, in foreign policy, interferes in the 30 Years' War. He backs the Protestants against the Holy Roman Emperor. And why does he do this? Well, if you go back to the last discussion on the wars of religion, you remember that France wants to stop a strong, centralized Holy Roman Empire from happening. And so, backing the Protestants in the north ensures that the Holy Roman Empire is going to be decentralized and broken up into all these small different states. And so therefore, the Catholic cardinal, fights on the side of the Protestants in that war. Yeah?
You said the Edict of Nantes gave Huguenots the right to a militia.
Yes. Huguenots had the right. In the Edict of Nantes, Huguenots had not only the right to practice their religion in Huguenot towns, but the right to protect those Huguenot towns from attack. And so it granted them, these rights to have these militias to protect them. And Richelieu takes that away. Okay, now, as you can imagine, these centralizing tendencies under Cardinal Richelieu that begin under him, taking away these rights of these towns, these nobles to have their militias, or having these intendants, there is resistance from the nobles. And Cardinal Mazarin, who's the regent after Cardinal Richelieu, he is going to face resistance when the king, a young Louis XIV, very, very young, when he is, the new king, Cardinal Mazarin is going to face resistance known as Le Fronde. Okay? The Fronde is basically a civil war in France. The nobles are fighting against the king. They want to weaken the king or stop him from, continuing to centralize power. They want to force the king to basically accept limitations on his powers. The Fronde fails. And Louis XIV, when he, this happens in his childhood, and so he will remember this and will be working to limit the power of the nobles throughout his life. Okay, so what are the policies then of Louis XIV? Well, we've got that term there, l'état c'est moi. This is his famous statement, l'état c'est moi, and that means, I am the state, or the state, it is me. In other words, the state, the source of laws, the thing in charge of providing protection, controlling the military, that's him. And therefore, other people don't have the right to interfere in this. He has final authority over the state. The laws, the courts, the military. Now, to help bring control over these nobles, Louis builds Versailles. Versailles is this large this large palace, and it will be the new capital of France. The capital will no longer be Paris, but it will be outside Paris at Versailles. Therefore, nobles that want to be in good graces with the king or have positions in the king's government will have to live there. And therefore, this is a way for Louis to monitor many nobles, to make sure that they are not, plotting against him. And this is also a way for Louis to impress people. Versailles is beautiful. It's, elaborately decorated, these huge lawns, and it is awe-inspiring. And so it's a propaganda tool to suggest the power and the majesty of this king. Now, when it comes to dealing with the nobles, Versailles is not the only thing Louis does, right? There's many nobles that don't live there. So Louis still has to work with those parliaments that control the laws in their regions. And that's why Louis is using intendants. These intendants are his ministers or his representatives to those parliaments. And Louis works with the nobles in those parliaments to ensure that any laws he passes will be followed. Okay? So, sometimes many historians sometimes look back at Louis the XIV and said he had absolute political control. But in fact, this political control was on the front. In reality, he had to work and negotiate with nobles through those parliaments to make sure his laws were passed. Was he a very effective, able leader at doing this? Yes. And that's why he looked like an absolutist leader. When it comes to the economy, Louis XIV had a finance minister named Colbert, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. I almost said Stephen Colbert. And I had to search. My brain had to search the other file. Like Colbert, Stephen. No, Colbert, Jean-Baptiste. Okay. Colbert is his finance minister, and Colbert's policies are going to be known as mercantilism. And we're going to look more at these tomorrow, I think, in our discussion on economics, or next week when we look at Review 5. But basically, mercantilism is, the government will sort of manage the economy in order to acquire more bullion and in order to maximize economic productivity, in order to have the maximum amount of economic activity in a country. So these are policies such as, and we'll discuss these later, but policies such as providing incentives for different businesses. So for example, the government will give money to start a silk industry. Another policy to increase economic activity is to have colonies overseas and build navies to protect ships, to trade between seas, or between colonies and the motherland. And another example is to reduce internal tariffs, which gets to the next term on there, the 5 Great Farms. And the 5 Great Farms is a free trade zone in France, which will be the largest free trade zone in Europe at that time. Now remember, there's all sorts of tariffs across Europe, not just between countries, but within countries between the different areas controlled by different nobles, controlled by those different feudal interests. And so Colbert is able to, for a large part of France, eliminate in these 5 great farms, these 5 great manors, he's able to eliminate the tariffs in between them and able, therefore, to increase economic trade.